The room was dark, the kind of dark that swallows sound and light. In the middle of it, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was on the verge of a breakdown. He was sweating profusely, his white silk pajamas clinging to his body. His eyes, usually bright and electric, were now wild and unfocused. Linda Thompson, his girlfriend, stood in the corner, tears streaming down her face. She was scared, and she wasn't the only one. Red and I, his closest friends, had just been summoned to his bedroom. We knew something was seriously wrong. Elvis, who usually commanded the room with his presence, was now a shadow of himself. "Come here, Sonny," he said, his voice a mix of desperation and command. I knelt down in front of him, and he grabbed my hands, his grip tight and trembling. "The man has to die. You know the man has to die. The Sonny must go. You know it, Sonny, you know it. There is too much pain in me, and he did it. Do you hear me? I am right. You know I'm right. Mike Stone has to die. You will do it for me, kill the Sonny. Sonny, I know I can count on you. I know I can." Linda was crying, her sobs echoing in the silent room. I felt a lump in my throat, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew Elvis was in a dark place, but I never imagined it would come to this. "No, boss, let's forget that talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know he has caused you pain, but you can't talk like that. It ain't right, it just ain't right." But Elvis wasn't listening. He was on a mission only he understood. "Mike Stone must die," he repeated, his voice growing louder. "He must die. You will do it for me. You must. He has no reason to live." Elvis suddenly pushed back the covers and rolled out of bed, causing a pile of religious books, including the Bible, to scatter across the floor. He went to the closet and began rummaging through it. Red and I exchanged a terrified glance. We both knew what was coming. When Elvis emerged from the closet, he was holding a gray-green M16 rifle. He held it out to me, his eyes pleading. "Doesn't anyone understand? Oh God, why can't anyone understand?" he ranted. "Why can't you all understand why this man must die?" I took the rifle, my hands shaking. I backed away, trying to reason with him. "No, boss, please, no, please don't," I begged, my voice breaking. Elvis, now in a frenzy, leaped back onto the bed and started scaling the headboard. His tirade continued, his words a jumbled mix of pain and rage. "He has hurt me so much, you all know that. He has broken up my family. He has taken my wife away from me. He has destroyed everything and hurt me so much, and nobody cares. He is the one who has done it all." I glanced at Red, who looked just as lost and scared as I felt. Linda was still crying, her sobs filling the room. The man we all loved, the man who had touched so many lives, was spiraling out of control, and we were helpless to stop him. Just a few hours earlier, everything had seemed perfect. The Aloha from Hawaii concert had been a triumph, beamed to an estimated 1.5 billion people around the world. Elvis had been on top of the world, his performance a testament to his enduring talent and charisma. But now, in the darkness of his hotel suite, the king was falling apart, and we were all caught in the storm. The events leading up to this moment had been a whirlwind. Elvis had been working tirelessly, performing more shows than ever before. He had lost weight, looked great, and had even lured Jack Lord, his favorite actor from Hawaii 5-0, to his show. It was a moment of triumph, but it was also the beginning of the end. The days leading up to the concert had been filled with rehearsals, excitement, and a sense of renewal. Elvis had his hair restyled and a new jumpsuit designed, one that screamed America to the world. He had been in high spirits, but the pressure of performing before a global audience had taken its toll. Now, as we stood in that dark room, the weight of it all was crushing. The man who had once brought so much joy to the world was now a shadow of his former self, and we were all powerless to help him. Linda tried to soothe him. "Baby, don't, honey," she said softly. "Don't, please don't. I couldn't stand to watch any more." I left the room, M16 in hand, and tossed it into a wastebasket in the hall. I collapsed on the couch, and Lamar looked at me, his face serious. "Lamar, it's bad," I told him. "Elvis wants me to kill Mike Stone. He put the M16 in my hands and told me to go out and do it. He's trying to make me do it." Lamar leaned back and put his feet up on the table. "Son, it's going to be a long night." I shook my head. "No, it's going to last longer than a night. This is going to drag on, and I don't know what to do." Back in the bedroom, Linda called Dr. Elias Gainem, Elvis's personal doctor who was always on call. Elvis turned to Red and started ranting. "Damn it, Red, you know he has to die. Find someone to take him out. I want that son of a bitch dead. Make some calls, find someone. I could do it in 10 seconds. You can do it. Mike Stone has caused me too much pain." Red just listened and nodded until Dr. Gainem arrived and gave Elvis a shot of Valium to calm him down. The next day, Elvis asked Red if he'd put out a call for a hitman to kill Mike Stone. "I'm working on it, boss," Red told him. "I've made some calls. It's going to take a little time. I'm working on it." Red hadn't actually made any calls. He was just buying time, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. He finally called his friend and mentor, actor Robert Conrad. "Look, don't get involved," Conrad said. "Stay away from it. I've seen guys act like this from pills or shots. Just go along with what they say and keep putting it off until they calm down. He will come to his senses and forget all about it. We hope." But Elvis didn't forget. He kept pushing Red, until Red finally made some calls to find someone willing to help. The guy said it would cost $10,000, and Red told Elvis. Elvis had to give the final word. Elvis thought for a long time, staring at the ground. Finally, he looked up and said, "Ah, hell, let's just leave it for now. Maybe it's too much. Let's just leave it alone." Red was so relieved, he went out and got drunk after the show. Mike Stone was almost a phone call away from being killed. Not long after that, Priscilla's lawyer called to say the divorce would cost more than expected. Elvis's lawyer, Ed Hookstratton, had initially arranged a settlement of $100,000 plus monthly spousal and child support. Priscilla would keep some cars and a motorcycle. But when she talked to her friend and interior decorator, Philly's Man said it was too low. Priscilla contacted Hookstratton to demand more. He refused, so she hired a new lawyer, Arthur Toll, who got her a much better deal. She received $725,000 upfront, $4,200 a month in spousal support for a year, and $6,000 a month for 10 years. She also got $4,000 a month in child support and half the price of the Hillcrest home. Plus, she got 5% of Elvis's publishing company. The divorce would cost Elvis about $1,500,000. Elvis didn't fight it because he didn't want people to think he couldn't afford it, or was trying to cheat his ex-wife and daughter. But the truth was, he didn't have the money. He had to make a bad business decision to pay for it. RCA, Elvis's record label, offered $5,400,000 for all the rights to his back catalog. His royalties from the songs were about $500,000 a year. Elvis agreed to the deal, which ended up costing his estate millions in the long run. After the lawyers and taxes, Elvis only got about $1,500,000, which he used to pay off Priscilla. The stress was showing. In May 1973, Elvis opened a show at Lake Tahoe, and he was about 30 pounds overweight. We added Dave Hebler to the security team. Dave was a karate expert and a good fit. He was quiet, confident, and always respectful to Elvis. Elvis was having breathing problems and needed treatments. He even hired a masseur to help with the mucus in his lungs. Joe Esposito and Jerry Schilling went on a European vacation, and Elvis wasn't happy about it. He felt stuck in the room getting treatments while they went to have fun. Ed Parker flew in from Los Angeles to help me. Charlie, Ricky, David, and Kenny Hicks. Elvis was getting only a few hours of sleep a night, and it was hard on me. I had to pick up the slack. One night, Dr. Gainem gave Elvis a double dose of Valium to help him sleep. I got a shot too and finally got some rest. A few hours later, Elvis woke me up and told me to call Colonel Parker. Parker's assistant, Tom Diskin, answered. When Parker came on the line, he heard my slurred voice and asked what was wrong. I told him about the Valium, and he said to call him later. I gave the phone to Elvis and went back to sleep. On the way back to Los Angeles, Elvis gave me a new Cadillac Eldorado for staying with him. He also gave Ed a new Cadillac Sedan DeVille and Kenny a new Corvette. Colonel Parker had to cancel some of Elvis's shows because of his health. Hookstratton hired John O'Grady to find out who was supplying Elvis with drugs. O'Grady reported that it was mainly DRS. Nishapoulos and Gainem and the dentist, Max Shapiro. Others noticed Elvis's decline. After a show in August 1973, Lucille Ball, Liza Minnelli, Petula Clark, and Joan Rivers visited Elvis's suite. Lucille Ball asked Elvis what he was taking, and he quickly changed the subject. I walked Ball and her husband out, and she kept asking why Elvis was doing this to himself. Elvis's behavior got more erratic as the month went on. One night, he accidentally broke a fan's ankle during a karate demonstration. He paid her medical costs and gave her a $5,000 settlement. Another night, he slapped a guest who had slapped Lee Majors. Elvis was protective of his friends. In October 1973, Vernon and I went with Elvis to the courthouse in Santa Monica for the finalization of his divorce. He was in a jogging suit and seemed sad. "Damn, I don't look forward to this, but it's finally over," he said. "It weighs heavy on my heart, but once I sign those papers, it's over and done." I waited outside while Elvis and Priscilla went into the judge's chambers. After 20 minutes, they came out, hugged and smiled for the press. They exchanged goodbyes, and Priscilla waved as she walked away. Elvis winked back. The fairy tale was over. Elvis was about to start a new chapter, but I wish I could have skipped it. Elvis was deeply committed to helping Brian, even if it meant laying hands on him and praying for his recovery. We all gathered in Elvis's room, and Brian, fascinated by the bright stone on Elvis's turban, reached up and pulled it, causing the turban to fall over Elvis's face. Elvis, remaining calm, gently told Brian to let go. Despite the humorous moment, we all tried to keep a straight face, not wanting to disturb Elvis's seriousness. I managed to pry Brian's hand off the turban, and Elvis pushed it back on his head, resuming his prayers. He then announced that Brian's fever was starting to pass. I felt Brian's forehead and couldn't really tell, but I didn't want to break Elvis's spirit, so I agreed. About a half hour later, Brian's temperature dropped, and we called Elvis to let him know. He was pleased and asked us to call if there were any changes. The next day, I told Elvis that Brian was much better. He thanked me and asked to be informed if anything changed. It was clear that Elvis was genuinely concerned and wanted to help. However, behind this caring side, Elvis was struggling with his own issues. He had been using prescription drugs heavily, and when we tried to confront him, he would dismiss us, saying it wasn't our business. He even threatened our jobs if we persisted. Despite the warnings, Elvis continued to ignore the signs that he was heading for a fall. One night, while on a flight to Memphis, Elvis started having trouble breathing. He was taking large amounts of Demerol at the time. When he arrived in Memphis, Linda called Dr. Nick, who rushed Elvis to Baptist Memorial Hospital. Elvis was in bad shape, bloating, semi-comatose, and in shock. The doctors thought he might have congestive heart failure due to fluid buildup in his body. They were shocked by the black and blue marks all over him, which Elvis claimed were from acupuncture needles. Joe later revealed they were from drug needles. Dr. Nick called Max Shapiro, who confessed to giving Elvis daily Demerol shots. Realizing the severity, Dr. Nick put Elvis on phenobarbital and methadone, a drug used for heroin addicts. Linda stayed by Elvis's side in the hospital. Getting Elvis back on his feet was tough. He snuck sleeping pills and had Ricky Stanley bring him crystal burgers and meatloaf from Graceland. Before he was discharged, addiction specialists warned Elvis about the dangers of prescription drug abuse and recommended a treatment center, but Elvis showed no interest. Elvis's performances in Vegas and on the road were becoming routine, but he got excited when George Waite approached him with a proposal for a karate film. Elvis flew Waite and his girlfriend to Vegas to meet and discuss the project. During his show, Elvis announced that he would produce the film, The New Gladiators. After the show, Elvis gave Waite a check for $50,000 to start production. The idea was for Elvis to star in the film, but due to his condition, it was decided to make a documentary instead. Elvis would finance, appear in, and narrate the documentary, which would showcase karate competitors and their training. Elvis's involvement in karate was significant, and he even performed Kai exercises on camera. However, the project faced setbacks when Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, intervened and advised Elvis to stop funding it. The documentary was never completed and remained dormant for years until it was released in 2002. Elvis's health and behavior continued to decline. At the end of his Vegas engagement, he lashed out at the audience about being sick and not strung out. When he arrived in College Park, Maryland, for a tour, he looked terrible. His hair was a mess and his speech was slurred. We tried to cover for him, but it was clear something was wrong. After a nap, Elvis performed, but he was barely coherent and the show was cut short. The next night, Elvis was slightly better, but a reviewer from the Washington Post wrote about his weight gain, which upset Elvis. He told the crowd he wore a bulletproof vest on stage, and was a federal narcotics agent and an 8th-degree black belt. The audience cheered, but the school officials decided Elvis would never be invited back. Things got worse as the tour progressed. Red and the others found out that Tim Beatty, a bass player, had cocaine for Elvis. They confronted Tim, and Elvis called Red and me into his room, warning us to stay out of his business. He said he could quit anytime, but needed the drugs now. Red reminded him of the good old days, but Elvis said those days were gone. After the tour, Elvis went to Dr. Gainham for a weight loss program, but he left 10 pounds heavier. His condition was so bad that Colonel Parker postponed his engagement at the Las Vegas Hilton. Elvis was admitted to the hospital with breathing problems, and the press was told he had liver issues, but it was really due to his drug abuse. While Elvis was in the hospital, his father, Vernon, had a heart attack and was placed in the room next to Elvis's. A few months later, Barbara Strace, and her boyfriend John Peters, approached Elvis about starring in a remake of A Star is Born. Elvis was excited, but he later backed out, citing concerns about Strace, Ann's control and Peters's potential role as director. The deal fell through when Colonel Parker made unreasonable demands, including top billing for Elvis. Elvis's struggles with drugs and his declining health continued to overshadow his career and personal life. Despite moments of hope, the road ahead was uncertain. Elvis's life was a roller coaster of highs and lows. By 1975, things were getting more and more unpredictable. He hadn't had a top 10 hit since Burning Love in 1972, and he had been touring nonstop for 5 years. His behavior was becoming more erratic and outlandish. One day in mid-June, Elvis called me into his bedroom at Graceland and introduced me to a doctor. He asked if I noticed anything different about him. I didn't, but he pointed out that the doctor had done some plastic surgery on his eyes and chin. I didn't see much of a difference, but I complimented him anyway. A month later, I got a letter from Blue Cross Blue Shield denying coverage for cosmetic surgery I supposedly had at Mid-South Hospital. I never had any surgery, but Elvis had checked into the hospital under my name. When I told Vernon Presley, he said not to worry about it. On stage, Elvis's behavior was getting stranger. During one tour, he introduced singer Kathy Westmoreland and made some inappropriate comments about her. The audience took it the wrong way, and Kathy started getting indecent propositions. Joe Esposito asked Elvis to stop, but the next night, Elvis said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Kathy Westmoreland, and if she doesn't like the way I introduce her, she can get the hell off the stage." This led to a walkout by some of the backup singers. In Asheville, North Carolina, the audience wasn't responsive, so Elvis started goading them to clap. Later, in his hotel room, Elvis pulled out a gun and waved it around. The gun went off, and the bullet grazed Dr. Nick's chest. Vernon was furious, but Elvis just laughed it off. At another show, Elvis handed out jewelry to the audience, costing him $35,000. He even shot up a chandelier in his Vegas suite and destroyed a toilet at Graceland because he didn't like the color. Elvis's spending was out of control. He bought 14 Cadillacs and gave them away, even to a stranger in a showroom. He also bought several planes, including a 129-foot jet called the Lisa Marie, which he had customized with a bedroom, TVs, and gold-plated fixtures. The plane cost him over $1 million to buy and maintain. In August 1975, Elvis was on a flight to Vegas when he had a severe asthma attack. The plane had to make an emergency landing in Dallas. Red, who was on the flight, said Elvis had taken a bunch of pills before takeoff. Elvis was terrified, but they managed to land safely and stayed in a motel for a few hours until he recovered. By 1976, working for Elvis was turning into a nightmare. His mood swings and erratic behavior were taking a toll. One bright spot was a 10-day vacation in Vail, Colorado, for his 41st birthday. We flew in the Lisa Marie and rented a house for Elvis and Linda Thompson. The rest of us stayed in condos. We sang Happy Birthday to Elvis on the way to Vail, and he laughed, saying the mountains were passing by too fast. On his birthday, Linda brought out a cake, but most of us were doing our own thing. Elvis was disappointed and seemed high. A used car salesman named David Leach made a sarcastic comment about the security, which made Dave Hebler angry. Elvis stepped in, and we ended up in his bedroom where he showed us photos of men who had caused trouble in Vegas. He wanted to find them and wipe them off the face of the earth. We were all stunned. A few days earlier, Elvis had played a show in Pontiac, Michigan, where a mentally challenged man had threatened him. I had the man taken into custody as a precaution, but I didn't tell Elvis. When he found out, he was furious and called me. He demanded to know about any threats, even if they were under control. In Aspen, Elvis told a wild story about participating in an undercover drug raid, but it was all fiction. The police officers noticed a powerful painkiller on Elvis's bedside table and asked if he had cancer. I admitted he didn't need it, but didn't have the heart to tell them the truth about his drug use. Elvis went on another car-buying spree, giving out Lincoln Continentals and Cadillacs. A local TV reporter joked about wanting one, and Elvis delivered a Seville to the station the next day. One night, Elvis decided he wanted to move into Jerry Schilling's condo at 3 a.m. When Jerry refused, Elvis threatened to have Red beat him up. Jerry quit and left for California. In late January, Elvis attended the funeral of a police officer in Denver. He wore a Denver police captain's uniform, which raised eyebrows. He also kept going to a restaurant called the Colorado Gold Mine Company for a special sandwich. One day, he decided he had to have one for lunch, and had his pilots fly him to Denver just for that. Elvis's behavior was becoming more and more erratic, and it was clear he was on a self-destructive path. Despite the fun times, the nightmare was just beginning. Elvis's life was getting more complicated. He was ordering absurd things, like 22 massive sandwiches that could feed a small army. When the plane landed in Denver, a private hangar was waiting, and the sandwiches were delivered on a silver tray with champagne, Perrier water, and Pepsis over cracked ice. Each sandwich cost $49.95, and the total bill was around $3,387. But the round-trip airplane ride added about $40,000 to the cost. It was a lot of money, but Elvis didn't seem to care. Back in Memphis, Elvis was supposed to record a new album, From Elvis Presley Boulevard, Memphis, Tennessee. He didn't want to leave home, so RCA brought the recording studio to him. They set up a mobile unit outside Graceland and put expensive equipment in the den to make it sound good. Elvis's road band and some session musicians were there, but Elvis wasn't very interested in making music. He showed up in a Denver police uniform and only managed to record 3 tracks. He was distracted and angry, going back and forth between his bedroom and the den. In the den, he sang about lost love, but in his bedroom, he ranted about taking out drug dealers who had gotten his stepbrother Ricky hooked on heroin. Red and I were called to Elvis's room during a break. The floor was covered with weapons, and Elvis handed us a list of names and police file pictures. He wanted us to help him get rid of the drug dealers. We tried to talk him out of it, but it was clear he was in a dangerous place. The recording sessions were flat and uninspired. Elvis was just going through the motions. He was supposed to record 20 tracks, but they only managed to get 12. Elvis's addiction was taking over, and it was showing in his performances. He slurred his words, forgot lyrics, and sometimes used cue cards to remember the songs. One night, Red tried to talk some sense into Elvis. Elvis agreed at first, but then exploded the next morning, telling Red to stay out of his personal life. It was clear that Elvis was struggling, and even the people who loved him couldn't reach him. Elvis's Aunt Delta brought a package from Dr. Gainham. It contained phenyphrine with codeine, which was supposed to be a placebo. When I opened it, I realized Gainham had lied. I was furious and never trusted him again. Colonel Parker kept pushing Elvis to go on tour, because it was the only time he stayed clean. But when Elvis came back, he would retreat to his room for days or weeks, and his performances started to suffer. He was always high, and it showed. There were moments of light, though. On April 25, 1976, my wife Judy and our son Brian visited Elvis before a show in Long Beach, California. Brian was 3.5 and not feeling well. He was usually close to Linda Thompson, But that day he was cranky. When we got to the dressing room, Brian walked right into Elvis's arms. Elvis said, "I love you," and Brian said, "I love you too, Elvis." It was a special moment, and it showed that Elvis had a tender heart, even when he was struggling. A week later, Elvis opened a show in Lake Tahoe. He was very bloated and needed oxygen between songs. His appearance was so alarming that John O'Grady called Elvis's attorney, Ed Hookstratton, who then contacted Priscilla. They wanted Elvis to check into a detox center, but he refused. Elvis's addictions were also affecting his finances. He got involved in a racquetball court business with Joe Esposito and Dr. Nick, but it turned out to be a money pit. Elvis wanted out, but he backed down. On July 3rd, Elvis was performing in Dallas. I had arranged for Judy and Brian to visit me in Memphis after the tour, but when I called to check on them, Judy was crying. Vernon Presley had canceled their plane tickets. I talked to Elvis about it, and he said he would fix it. But later, Ricky Stanley told me that Elvis was angry with me for putting down his daddy. The next night, Elvis gave an amazing performance at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis. He was in his white jumpsuit, aviator sunglasses, and a towel around his neck. He was still sweating from the show. I said good night to him, and he wished me a happy birthday. It was the last time I saw him. A week later, I was at the dentist's office when Vernon Presley called. He said they were making changes and cutting back on expenses. I was being fired. I felt gut shot. I went back to the hotel room, and Judy and Brian were in the pool. I told Judy the news, and we both cried. It was a tough moment, but it was clear that Elvis was in a dark place, and even those closest to him couldn't help him anymore. Vernon called it a cutback. He said there were others, but he wouldn't tell me who. I felt a knot in my stomach. Just then, the phone rang. It was Dave Hebler. He asked if I had heard from Vernon yet. I told him I had, and that I suspected he had too. "Yeah, I did," Dave replied, quite a shock. We commiserated for a few minutes, and then I told Dave I was calling Red. When Red answered, I could tell from his tone that he had been fired too. "Yeah, I talked to that Sonafabich," Red said. "I can't believe it." Red told me he had tried to talk to Elvis directly, but was told that Elvis had left for Palm Springs right after the tour ended. Red was planning to move back to California and get back into the movie industry. It sounded like a good idea to me, too. After we hung up, I called the Palm Springs house. I don't remember who answered, but when I asked if Elvis was up yet, they said no. I called back later and got a recorded message saying the number had been changed. It felt like I was being shut out. A couple of days later, Dave called me. He said Elvis had flown from Palm Springs to Las Vegas and was staying at Dr. Gainham's house. Without hesitation, Dave flew out and went straight to Gainham's place. He walked past the security gate and pounded on the front door. Inside, David, Ricky Stanley, Dick Grob, and Al Strada were there. Their eyes got wide when they saw Dave. No one dared to stop him, knowing he was a 7th-degree black belt, but Elvis was nowhere to be found. Dave figured he was stashed away, and after realizing he would have to break down every door to find him, he left. I could see their asses tightening up, Dave told me from a pay phone. We laughed, but it was more of a way to avoid crying. I wasn't ready to let things go without hearing from Elvis myself. I called Gainham's house, and he answered. I asked if Elvis was awake, and Gainham said, "Yes, he just finished eating." I asked Gainham to see if Elvis would talk to me about the situation. Gainham came back after a minute, almost apologetically. "Sonny, he doesn't want to talk about it." I asked him to try again, telling him I wasn't asking for my job back. I just wanted to know why I was fired. Gainham tried, but the answer was the same. "Sonny, I'm sorry, but Elvis doesn't want to talk about it." "Okay, I see," I said. "I see. Well, tell him I won't be calling back." Gainham replied, "I will," and I hung up. The hurt was deep. Losing the job was one thing, but losing my best friend was another. It was tough to bear. Vernon gave us 3 days to clear our things out of Graceland and Elvis's other properties, and we got 1 week's severance pay. Over the years, I've thought about why Elvis fired us. I don't believe Vernon made the decision. Elvis was the one calling the shots. He didn't want to face us. Looking back, I think there were several reasons. First, Red and I had grown up with Elvis. As we got older, he felt he didn't have the same control over us, especially when we confronted him about his drug use. We intercepted drug shipments and told him he needed help. Elvis didn't like anyone holding up a mirror to him, showing what he had become. When Lucille Ball confronted him about his drug use, she was shown the door. So were we. Elvis and his father were also stressed by the lawsuits piling up against him. Some of these lawsuits he blamed on me as his security chief. One incident stood out. During a show at the Sahara in 1974, a man named Edward Ashley tried to get his female friends into Elvis's suite. I caught him trying to turn off the lights and attack David. I stopped him, and he filed a $6,600,000 lawsuit. The case was dropped against me, but it left a mark. Another time, Red had to deal with a man named Kaijo Peter Pajarainen, who was bothering female guests in Elvis's suite. Red broke his nose and Pajarainen filed a lawsuit. Elvis settled both cases to avoid the hassle. Despite these incidents, we handled our jobs with restraint. After we were fired, we learned from Linda Thompson that Elvis had told Vernon to give each of us $5,000 and was going to hire us back, but he wanted to show he was still the boss. Instead, we got 3 days' notice and 1 week's pay. Judy, Brian, and I moved to California. Red and I found stunt work on the $6 Million Man. We knew Lee Majors through Elvis, and he helped us out. Brian loved the show, and when Lee autographed a photo for him, it made Brian a hit with his friends. Red eventually got a permanent acting gig on NBC Black Sheep Squadron, thanks to Robert Conrad. Dave moved back to Los Angeles and got back into teaching martial arts. Judy and I raised and showed Arabian horses and made and sold custom Western jewelry. It was a different life, but it made me grow up. For years, I had put Elvis's needs before my own family. Judy's strength, patience, and understanding kept us together through tough times. Elvis's personal life was deteriorating. His drug addiction was severe, and he was overweight with health issues. He would binge on food and then starve himself. His financial problems were also mounting. At the end, he had $1 million in his checking account and only $1,000 in savings. It was a stark contrast to his earlier years. Elvis's behavior became erratic. Billy Smith told me that once, Elvis thought someone was trying to shoot him and almost used a shotgun. It was a delusional moment caused by his medication. The only time he seemed to sober up was when his daughter, Lisa Marie, visited. But even these moments were brief. Red, Dave, and I decided to write a book, Elvis, What Happened? We hoped it would scare Elvis into getting help. We signed a contract with World News Corporation, and the book was published by Ballantine. We started taping interviews in October 1976, hoping to make a difference. It didn't take long for Elvis to find out what we were up to. About a week into our interviews with Dunleavy, he got a call from John O'Grady, who asked to speak to me. I took the call in the suite's bedroom. "Sonny, I'm calling as an emissary for someone I'm representing," O'Grady said. "There are interests out there that prefer you not publish this book you're planning to write." When I started to tell him that he knew Elvis had a problem, O'Grady cut me off. It hit me that either Elvis was listening in on an extension, or O'Grady was taping the conversation, and didn't want Elvis to hear about the prescription problem. "Sonny, I'm not here to talk about anything else. I'm authorized to see if I can get you three to come up with a figure to not do the book. If you agree on an amount, we can take care of this quickly," he said. "So he's trying to buy us off now, right?" I said. "No, let's just call it overdue severance pay," O'Grady said. John always had a way with words. I told him we'd signed a contract and received the first 2 payments on our advance, but O'Grady countered, "Sonny, you're not listening. If we can agree on a figure, you 3 can walk away and not do the book. We'll pay for any legal costs and refund any money you've already been given." I promised to talk with Red and Dave about it, and O'Grady said he'd call back in 15 minutes. I told him it would take only 5. I had a pretty good idea what the others would say. When I hung up, I called Red and Dave into the room and told them about the call. "I know what my answer is, and I think I know yours. He's trying to buy us off. What do you say, guys?" Red shook his head. "No, not this time, man." Dave made it unanimous. "Nope, that would just make us like everybody else. Give them a car, give them money, give them whatever they want, but we're not going to be that way." We knew that unless we went ahead with our plan, Elvis wouldn't change his life. If we wrote the book, maybe he would. When O'Grady called back, I gave him a firm no. "Is that your final decision?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Well, I'll convey your answer," O'Grady said, and we said goodbye. After that, Red, Dave, and I decided to pretend to write a long statement and put all our documentation with it. We gave it to our lawyer to keep in his safe. It was a ploy against the possibility of something suspicious happening to us to stop the book. We let it be known through our lawyer where those documents were and that they would be released to the authorities and media if anything happened to us. We were well aware of Elvis's sometimes uncontrollable temper. In his book, David Stanley wrote that he had to talk Elvis out of hunting us down and killing us. According to David, Elvis had kicked in his bedroom door, dressed in a black jumpsuit with a DA patch, carrying 2 .45s and a Thompson submachine gun. He hustled David into his Ferrari, ranting about finding us and putting us out of his misery. David talked him down by reminding him that his daughter, Lisa Marie, could forgive a father who abused medication, but not one who murdered 3 former associates. Linda Thompson also decided she couldn't stick around and watch Elvis self-destruct. She once said she could keep Elvis alive for another 5 years, or wake up one morning to find him dead. Both options would tire her out and age her internally. She left soon after and became involved with his keyboard player, David Briggs. Despite everything, she still loved Elvis and continued to check on him through friends. A few weeks after Linda left, George Klein introduced Elvis to 19-year-old Ginger Alden. I never knew Ginger, so I don't know if it's true that they became engaged, but I doubt Elvis would ever have married again. He loved Linda, and I wish they had married. People often ask me if Elvis would be alive today, if Linda had been with him that night at Graceland. I tell them I can't say for sure, but I believe if Linda had been there, he wouldn't have died that night. Elvis's last Las Vegas engagement was in December 1976. His performances had become weak and bizarre. He read lyrics right off the sheet and would burst out with declarations like, "I hate Las Vegas." The wheels had fallen off his incredible comeback since 1969. His career careened from legitimate to ludicrous, and Elvis had become a caricature of himself. Bill Burke of the Memphis Press-Scimitar was there for Elvis's closing night, and wrote a story that shook the faithful back in Tennessee. He wrote that after sitting through Elvis's performance, one wondered how much longer it could be before the end came. Former groupies expressed concern for him, but they kept coming back, hoping it might be the last time around. Years later, Bill confirmed to me that he had known about Elvis's drug habit since 1973, but was told to keep quiet. "The people think of Elvis as baseball, apple pie, and Chevrolet," his editor told him, "and we will never ruin that image." Elton John once said that if Elvis had been covered by the no-holds-barred British press, his problem would have come to light sooner, forcing him to deal with his addiction. But as Red, Dave, and I learned, not even the threat of public humiliation was enough to stop Elvis from abusing drugs. He was so afraid his fans would desert him, but they would have loved him even more for acknowledging his human frailties and dealing with them. About a week after O'Grady's call, Charlie Hodge phoned Red. Charlie was so nonchalant that Red suspected Elvis was listening in. The conversation was short, and when it ended, Red had a feeling that Elvis would call him. "Elvis is going to call me," he said. "I just know it." Sure enough, the next morning around 7, Red was awakened by a call from Elvis. His voice was heavily slurred. Red had been expecting the call and was able to tape it. Elvis's state was awful. He told Red that he was in the best shape of his life and wasn't worried about the book at all. That bizarre episode strengthened our resolve to go ahead with the project. Ballantine ordered an initial print run of 400,000 copies of our book and slated it for release on August 1st, 1977. The book was serialized in England and Australia, creating a buzz in the States. The morning of August 16th, I gave an interview to Bob Greene, a columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times. When Greene asked if it would shock me if Elvis suddenly died, I said no, but I felt a pang of despair. Neither of us knew it, but Elvis was already dead. After the interview, Judy and I took our Arabian mare to see if she was ready for breeding. The sky was overcast, and a light rain was falling. We met our friend Dr. Harvey Cohen, who looked concerned. "Have you heard?" he asked. "Elvis died." I blurted out. "Yeah," Harvey confirmed. I dropped to my knees and began sobbing. No, no, oh God, he doesn't deserve this. He can't be dead. Judy put her arms around me, and we cried together. When I could stand again, I walked over to a wooden fence and punched it, cracking the top board. The anguish I felt was unlike any pain I had ever experienced. That night, I cried myself to sleep. In the years since, I have wondered when the tears would stop, but they never have. The next morning, my attorney, John Irwin, called to say that Steve Dunleavy, the writer of our book, was going to be on ABC Good Morning America. Journalist Geraldo Rivera would also appear. The two didn't like each other, and their bickering made me angry. Rivera claimed Elvis had only a minor flirtation with drugs and called him as straight as anyone in this room. Dunleavy called Rivera Jerry instead of Geraldo, which didn't help. I called John Irwin and had him set up a press conference. Red was working on a film and couldn't make it, but Dave Hebler joined me at John's law office, wearing sunglasses because I had been crying. I stood by every word in our book, but disavowed Dunleavy and criticized him and Rivera for their appearance on Good Morning America. The media was hungry for answers about Elvis's sudden death, and a large crowd of journalists turned out. I told them that while I stood by the book, I disavowed our co-author and criticized the disgusting appearance on Good Morning America. After Elvis died, everything felt different. The world seemed to spin a bit slower, and the silence around us was heavy. People wanted to know what really happened to Elvis, and they kept asking questions. We tried to explain, but it was hard. We wrote a book called Elvis, What Happened, to tell the truth, but it didn't bring Elvis back. We missed him more than words could say. The book became a big success, selling millions of copies, but it didn't bring us any happiness. We just wanted Elvis to be with us again. The years that followed were a blur. People like Geraldo Rivera and Albert Goldman started writing and talking about Elvis's life in a way that hurt us. They made it seem like Elvis was a different person, someone we didn't recognize. It was hard to see our friend portrayed that way. Priscilla, Elvis's ex-wife, became the guardian of his estate. She worked hard to keep Graceland and Elvis's legacy alive. She opened Graceland to the public, and it became a place where people could remember Elvis, but there were legal battles and disagreements. Priscilla and I didn't always see eye to eye, and things got complicated. Years went by, and the anger people had about the book faded. Some fans still held grudges, but many understood why we wrote it. We did it because we loved Elvis and wanted to help him. One day I was at Graceland with my friends, and a fan recognized me. She thanked me for being there for Elvis, and it made me cry. It was a moment of healing. Elvis's daughter, Lisa Marie, grew up and became a public figure. She said some harsh things about us, the Memphis Mafia, but I know that wasn't the whole truth. We were like a second family to her when she was little. We played card games and took care of her. Her memories of us might be different, but we always loved her and Elvis. Looking back, I have some regrets. I wish we could have done more to help Elvis. I wish we could have found a way to protect him from his struggles, but I also know that we did our best. We were there for him and we loved him. If Elvis were still here, I believe we would still be friends. He was a complex person, but he had a big heart. He brought so much joy into my life, and I'll always be grateful for that. I miss him every day, and I know that no matter what, he's watching over us.